I'm Claire Whitman, 33 years old, and on most Sundays I sit at my parents' glossy dining table pretending the past doesn't echo in the silverware, pretending favoritism doesn't have a seat of its own, pretending I can swallow it down with pot roast. Tonight, the chandelier throws soft light over cut crystal like it has since I was a kid, and still my chest feels tight, as if air has rules in this house. My sister Brooke is running late, which means dinner will orbit her arrival the way our family always has. I tell myself I can keep my composure because I've earned it, because I've built a life that isn't borrowed. And yet, as footsteps cross the foyer and laughter floats in, I already know the evening is about to test whatever calm I walked in with. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to keep your dignity at a table where you felt unseen, tap like and subscribe. So more of these stories, find the people who need them. The Whitman house smells like Sunday rosemary butter, a hint of furniture polish that lingers in the old wood. My mother Elaine moves around the table with the same gentle choreography she's refined over decades, refilling water that doesn't need refilling, smoothing a napkin that isn't wrinkled, keeping peace by keeping motion. My father Martin checks his watch and clears his throat, the sound he uses when conversation should change course or someone should fall in line. I sit straight, hands folded, and try to focus on the simple weight of the fork, the cool rim of the glass, the sound of a clock in the hall that never misses. These are small anchors in a room where history often rises without warning. I was raised 4 miles from here in a modest ranch house we left when Dad's promotion came through and the mortgage turned into a statement piece. Back then the rules were simple: be kind, work hard, don't make a fuss. I took them seriously, earning scholarships, learning to stretch dollars, waiting for buses in winter, because thrift felt like honor. When we moved to the bigger home, our family's gravity shifted not all at once, but with little pulls I didn't have words for. Image mattered more. Presentation grew its own list of needs, and the quiet child who didn't ask for much was easier to overlook. I learned to excel in places that rewarded effort and to go quiet in rooms that did not. By the time I reached my late 20s, I had built a career in client relations at Summit Neurotech, where staying late and showing my work meant doors opened. My promotion this spring came with a corner office and a view of the city that still surprises me at dusk when the buildings turn soft and the highway hums in the distance. It was the first time I felt the life I pictured catch up to the life I lived. A steady salary, a team that trusts my judgment, and for once, the courage to buy something new without apologizing for wanting it. I drove home that night with leather seats cooling under my shoulders and a sense that I'd crossed an invisible threshold. I told no one at home the details. It felt good to keep one bright thing that belonged only to me. Brooke took a different path, which is to say, many of them. She started programs, sampled majors, collected student IDs like souvenirs, until school blurred into not for me, and the stories that circled our table cast her as resilient rather than restless. My parents adjusted to her seasons with open wallets and soft explanations, and I adjusted by picking up pieces when they fell quietly to the floor. If a security deposit couldn't clear, I covered it. If a bill slipped, I made a phone call at lunch and smoothed it over because I was capable, and that seemed like virtue. It is strange how good habits can turn into patterns that look like permission when no one names them. I didn't not for a very long time. If you had asked me a year ago to describe our family values, I would have said generosity, stability, and keeping your word. I still believe in those things, though I've learned that generosity without boundaries drains its giver, that stability asked of one person turns heavy, and that keeping your word must include keeping it to yourself. I carry those lessons like extra keys silent, but present, the kind that only become necessary when a lock finally changes. It takes time to recognize when care turns into assumption, and when support becomes something else entirely. Most of us don't notice the shift until we're standing in a room like this one watching the place settings glint, while something inside us quietly decides it is done being borrowed. Dad reaches for the carving knife eyes on the door. Mom sets my plate in front of me and touches my shoulder like a reminder to smile. We speak in careful sentences. Work is busy, the weather held, the neighbors sold their house fast. I nod, answer, breathe, and let the rhythm of their questions pass through me, the way a tide lifts and sets down a small boat. It is easier most nights to keep peace than to try to renovate a foundation laid over decades. And yet tonight, under the chandelier's warm light, I can feel a hairline crack widening. There is a kind of quiet you only hear when you're about to say something you've never said aloud, a hush inside the chest that sharpens your hearing and slows your hands. My phone in my purse, the cool chain at my neck, the faint scent of new leather that has no place in this room but followed me in. Anyway, I register each detail as if cataloging them could steady me. The front door swings open, the sound I've been waiting for, and Brooke's laugh sweeps down the hall like confetti thrown just ahead of her. She drops her bag on the entry table and blows a kiss toward the kitchen without looking a familiar entrance polished by years of practice. As she steps into the dining room, something small and cobalt flashes in her hand, catching the chandelier's light. I lift my eyes and feel my breath shorten, not with surprise exactly, but with recognition, the kind that tells you a line has just been crossed, even if no one else at the table feels it yet. Mom's smile brightens, Dad's voice warms, and the conversation tips naturally toward Brooke as it always does. I sit very still, steadying my hands on the napkin in my lap, because sometimes the first rupture arrives as a glimmer, not a crash. And as that key fob gleams once more between her fingers, I understand the evening is about to turn in a way none of us can politely ignore. Brooke slides into the chair across from me, the cobalt key fob glinting against the crystal stemware as if it belongs in her hand. Dad greets her warmly, asking about the interview. She smiles and says the manager was impressed. Mom leans in to praise her piling food onto her plate, while I keep my eyes fixed on the keys lying beside her water glass. The sight is sharp enough to make my throat tighten. I set down my fork and ask the only question that makes sense. "Did you take my car?" My voice comes out even measured, though my pulse drums hard against my wrist. Brooke rolls her eyes like I've overreacted, spinning the keyring once, before dropping it on the table with a soft clatter. "Relax," she says. "You hardly use it anyway." Dad straightens his face, settling into lines I've known since childhood. "Family helps family," he says firmly. "Your sister needed to look professional today." The words pull me back to the moment this morning when the spare keys weren't where they belonged. I had assumed I'd misplaced them, never imagining she had walked into my garage and driven away. I take a breath. "You could have asked." Mom sets her fork down, her smile forced at the edges. "Claire, darling, it's not as though you were using it." Her tone carries that practiced patience she reserves for me whenever I push against the family's rhythm. Brooke stabs at her food, unconcerned. "I'll need it again this weekend," she says casually, not even glancing at me. "There's a networking thing in Boulder." The word leaves my mouth before I can stop it. "No." Mom's fork stills midair. Dad's gaze sharpens. "Don't be selfish," he warns. "Your sister is trying to get her career moving. The least you can do is help." I lean back in my chair, feeling the sting rise and settle, a familiar ache that carries more years than tonight alone. Brooke shrugs and reaches for her glass. By the way, she adds, as if it's nothing some idiot scratched the passenger side when I was parking. Not a big deal. My phone buzzes in my pocket before I can respond. Then again, and again. I break Mom's rule and check. 6 notifications light up the screen. Friends, colleagues, all writing variations of the same question. "When did your parents buy you that car?" My breath catches as I open the app. There it is. A photo of Brooke leaning against my midnight blue sedan, manicured hand stretched across the hood. The caption reads, "Thanks Mom and Dad for the amazing gift. Feeling blessed." Comments roll beneath it, praising her, congratulating her. I set the phone face up in the center of the table. Silence ripples outward, touching each of us. "We need to talk about boundaries," I say. My voice steady, though the heat building in my chest makes my pulse quicken. Dad waves a dismissive hand. "It's just social media, Claire. Don't take it so personally. She only wanted to feel successful like you." Mom nods, her smile tightening. "Is that such a terrible thing?" Brooke doesn't look at me. "I'll delete it if it bothers you," she says, but her voice is careless. "People have already seen it, so what's the point?" The words fall heavy and my jaw tightens. "Show me the scratch," I tell her. She blinks. "What?" "On my car," I repeat. "The scratch." Minutes later, we stand in the driveway under the fading light. My eyes find the gash on the passenger door longer than a handspan red paint ground into the metal. Not a casual scrape, not someone brushing past in a crowded lot. A hydrant may be worse. My stomach turns. "Were you texting while driving?" I ask. She doesn't answer, only shifts her weight, her eyes sliding back toward the warm glow of the dining room. Does it matter? Insurance will cover it. My insurance. My premiums. I close my eyes briefly, then turn back toward the house without another word. Back at the table, I scroll through the rest of her posts, each one more brazen than the last. At a restaurant valet stand posing by the car, outside a country club keys dangling in her hand. A week earlier, outside a bar, laughing with friends as if it were her own. The pattern unfurls in my mind, winding backward. 17 years old the day I opened a letter with a Stanford scholarship inside. Mom barely looking up from decorations for Brooke's birthday party. Dad rolling up the driveway later with a red Volkswagen keys dangling for his princess. Years of working double shifts to cover tuition while Brooke bounced between campuses funded and forgiven each time she quit. My sweater's gone from closets, jewelry borrowed and never returned, the first spare key to my apartment suddenly missing after her visit. Each memory stitches into the next until it forms a fabric I can't ignore. I rise slowly from the table, my chair scraping against hardwood. My height feels unfamiliar, as though I've grown in the space of one breath. The chandelier above flickers across my mother's tear-filled eyes, my father's clenched jaw, Brooke's blank expression. This car, I say quietly, is the first major purchase I made with my own money. Money I worked 80-hour weeks to earn. It represents what I've built. Mom's tears spill over, but her voice sharpens. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us, with accusations. My phone buzzes again, another colleague writing, "Beautiful car. Must be nice to have that kind of support." I think of the hours, the late nights, the coffee refills, the countless revisions that led to that contract, and how my team toasted with paper cups when it closed. At work, recognition. At home, dismissal. I sling my purse over my shoulder, my movements calm, almost deliberate. Dad's voice cuts across the room. "Don't walk away from this table." I pause at the doorway, their eyes all pressing against me at once. "What are you going to do?" Brooke calls after me, her tone confident. "Call the police on your own sister." I turn back, hand on the frame. "No," I say, letting the words settle like stones, something more effective. Then I step out, the click of the closing door marking the end of the only script we've ever known. That night in my apartment, 12 floors above the street, I pace from one wall to the other, the city's hum beneath me. Through the glass, the sedan waits under a streetlight, its scars still visible even from this height. My desk glows with plaques, framed contracts, proof of work no one could ever mistake for handouts. I press my fingers against the cool glass eyes fixed on the car below. The truth settles over me with sudden clarity. If they won't respect my boundaries, then I'll need to protect them in a way they can't undo. And with that realization, the shape of a plan begins to take form, one I know will change the next Sunday dinner forever. I barely slept that night. The city hummed below my window, headlights sliding across the ceiling as I turned from side to side, but nothing settled the weight in my chest. By morning, the sun was bright against the blinds, and the mirror showed shadows beneath my eyes that no concealer could hide. I moved through my routine on autopilot, pouring coffee, straightening papers, but the quiet moments filled with memories I couldn't shake. The scholarship letter from Stanford resurfaced first. I was 17, the envelope thin and official, the words inside granting me a future I had worked toward since middle school. Mom glanced at it between taping ribbons for Brooke's birthday party, barely pausing before telling me to hang streamers. 2 hours later, Dad pulled into the driveway with a brand new red Volkswagen, dangling the keys in front of Brooke, while I stood by the kitchen window, still holding tape between my fingers. Her squeal carried through the glass, while my own news sat unread on the counter. College was no different. I took shifts at the campus bookstore in the mornings and waited tables until midnight. My parents sent $600 each semester for books and called it support. Brooke rotated through 3 universities in as many years full tuition paid before dropping out altogether. Mom patted her hand and said college wasn't for everyone. I bought my own used textbooks and circled due dates in red while Brooke tested majors like someone browsing catalogs. The pattern bled into everything. My sweaters disappeared from closets when she visited. Necklaces I saved for went missing later, seen in photos of her at parties. Even the spare key to my first apartment vanished after a weekend visit, though I told myself I'd misplaced it. Each incident seemed small at the time, not worth a confrontation, but the collection of them weighed heavy, a ledger of unspoken losses. Work became the one place where effort meant recognition. I still remember the day my boss, David Morales, walked me out to the parking lot to see my new sedan. He circled it, once nodded with approval, and said I'd earned every inch of it. His words stayed with me, echoing louder than anything I'd ever heard at the family table. That car wasn't just a purchase, it was proof of persistence late nights and contracts that no one handed me. Yet now, it was scratched, photographed, and claimed by someone else without hesitation. The silence in my apartment that week pressed against me. Evenings stretched long, my footsteps the only sound between the walls. I sorted files on my desk, dusted award plaques, rearranged books, anything to keep from pacing. Still the images crept back, the Instagram posts, the glint of keys on the table, my father's voice saying, "Family helps family." Each memory pressed like a thumb against a bruise. The more I tried to let it go, the more I realized it wasn't just about a car. It was about years of taking, years of minimizing, years of being told to give more because I could. At work, the whispers followed me. In the hallway, a colleague asked about the gift from my parents. At the coffee station, another congratulated Brooke on her new job and the company she must be representing, all because of her posts. I smiled politely, deflecting, but every comment chipped away at the wall I tried to keep between my family life and the career I built. The overlap stung because it meant the narrative was spreading beyond their house. It was leaking into the one place I thought was safe. Nights blurred into one another. I sat by the window watching the sedan gleam under the street lamp, the scratch catching light each time a car passed. I traced the edges of my coffee mug, the steam rising and fading while my mind replayed Dad's warning tone, Mom's practiced tears, Brooke's casual dismissal. My body carried the exhaustion of someone who keeps showing up to a game already decided. Each thought circled back to the same truth: nothing would change unless I drew a line they couldn't cross. The memories stretched further back than I expected, tugging me into corners I hadn't visited in years. I saw myself carrying stacks of textbooks across campus, then walking into my apartment where rent was due, knowing my parents had just covered Brooke's deposit across town. I remembered saving for months to buy a necklace, only to see it on her at Thanksgiving. No acknowledgement, no apology. I even recalled times I overheard Mom on the phone explaining away Brooke's choices, painting her as misunderstood, while I carried silence like a second skin. Each memory formed a thread, and together they wove into a pattern I could no longer ignore. The exhaustion didn't stay contained. In meetings, I found myself gripping my pen tighter than usual. In the elevator, my reflection looked distant, as if I were bracing for impact no one else could see. I went through motions but carried weight with every step, a quiet fatigue from years of being overlooked. It wasn't just my car that felt borrowed. It was my achievements, my effort, my sense of belonging in the family I kept returning to every Sunday. Still, I showed up to dinner the next week, though everything in me resisted. The roast smelled the same, the glasses sparkled the same, but the atmosphere felt heavier, charged with unspoken things. Brooke talked about a job lead she might pursue. Mom refilled water that didn't need refilling, and Dad asked about my work without really listening. I chewed slowly, nodding, while inside I traced the outline of decisions forming quietly in the background. Their words washed over me, but the old script no longer held. I wasn't angry in that moment, just tired in a way that left no room for compromise. Later that night, back in my apartment, I stood at the window again. The city lights stretched wide and the sedan sat where I could see it, as though waiting. My hands rested on the glass, cool against my palms, steadying me. I thought of every sacrifice I had made alone, every late night, every choice to give, when it was easier to say nothing. I thought of the ledger that had been filling since childhood, line after line of imbalance, and for the first time, instead of pacing the floor, I stood still. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt like space opening up for something new. I didn't yet know what form it would take, but I knew one thing clearly. I could no longer carry both their expectations and my own life. Something had to break, and this time it wouldn't be me. The thought settled in my chest with quiet certainty, and as the city's hum softened into night, I realized I was closer to that shift than ever before. The next morning, sunlight streamed across my apartment floor, catching the edge of my briefcase where I had left it by the door. I stood with my coffee in hand, staring down at the scratch on my sedan from 12 stories up. The gash glared at me, a bright reminder of everything I had ignored for too long. My fists curled slowly at my sides. Explaining myself to them wasn't going to change anything. The thought sharpened, then settled. If they refused to respect boundaries, I would have to create one they couldn't step around. By the time I reached the office, the building hummed with its usual Monday rhythm. Phones rang, printers churned, voices carried down the hall in familiar waves. Normally, I thrived in that energy, but today, each greeting felt heavier. Jessica from accounting stopped me by the break room, smiling as she stirred sugar into her coffee. "That car your parents got Brooke is gorgeous," she said lightly. "My husband's been looking at the same model." I forced a smile, murmured thanks, and moved on. A few steps later, another colleague congratulated Brooke on landing such supportive parents. My chest tightened as I walked faster, nodding without pausing. 4 more comments reached me before I made it to my office, each one stoking the fire I had carried since Sunday night. I closed the door behind me, the blinds rattling in the frame, and pressed my forehead against the cool glass for a moment. A knock came a beat later. Tyler, my assistant, peeked in. His brow furrowed. "You've got a budget meeting with Mr. Crane at 10, he reminded me. His eyes searched my face. "You okay?" I straightened my shoulders. "Clear my afternoon," I told him, "and find out who handles our corporate vehicle fleet." His expression shifted from concern to curiosity, but he only nodded. "Will do." At 10 sharp, I sat across from Howard Crane, the CFO, whose approval meant everything when money was involved. Years of steady results had earned his respect, and I knew this was the moment to use it. I slid a folder across his desk before he could open his spreadsheet. "Before quarterly numbers, I'd like to propose something that could reduce costs for our sales team." His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he opened the folder. Inside were pages I had prepared the night before: mileage reimbursement totals, maintenance expenses, tax benefits, and a projection for depreciation. I spoke clearly, laying out each figure, showing how a dedicated executive vehicle could cut reimbursement by nearly a third while presenting a stronger image to clients. When he reached the final page, a photo of my midnight blue sedan with the company logo mocked up on the door, his mouth curved just slightly. "And you happen to know of a vehicle that fits our needs?" His eyes met mine. "I do." I answered without hesitation. "Mine." Silence stretched between us for a breath. Then he leaned back in his chair, tapping the folder with one finger. "I wondered when you'd make a move like this. It's smart, Claire. It saves money and strengthens our image." Relief washed through me, but I kept my tone steady. "I'm glad you see the value." He nodded once, decisive. "Draft the paperwork." 2 hours later, I walked out of the legal department with preliminary documents in hand. By the end of the week, the car would no longer be personal property. Insurance maintenance, every detail would shift to Summit Neurotech. The company would even cover the cost of repairing the scratch Brooke had left behind. My steps slowed as I passed David Morales in the hallway. He caught my eye. "Heard about the proposal," he said quietly. "Clever move. Gives you space from all that." My stomach tightened. "You saw the posts." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Not my business, but if this helps, I'm glad." His words lingered long after he moved on. By Wednesday, the company mechanic had buffed out the gash, and the legal team finalized the agreement. I stood in the underground garage beside Walter Jeffries from legal as he checked each page. "Insurance transfer is effective immediately," he explained. "Plates will arrive next week. Reserved parking is already marked." Sure enough, the sign above the fresh paint read, "Reserved for client relations." My sedan gleamed beneath it, washed and polished, a small magnetic logo fixed neatly to the doors. Walter handed me a pen. "You're sure once this is done, you can't just change your mind?" The weight of the pen felt steady in my hand. "I'm sure." My signature curled across the page, final and certain. That evening, Jenna arrived at my apartment with a bottle of wine and cartons of pasta from our favorite Italian place. She raised her glass after I explained everything. To boundaries, she said, eyes bright, and to the most creative solution I've ever seen. I clinked my glass against hers, the tension in my chest easing for the first time in days. She twirled spaghetti onto her fork. "What will you tell them?" I leaned back, letting the steam of garlic and basil curl around us. "The truth," I said. Her gaze lingered. "And when they realize what you've done," I set my fork down steady now. "Then they'll learn that generosity isn't weakness." From my dining table, the glow of the city framed the sedan below. No longer just mine, but secured in a way that finally gave me peace. The hum of traffic carried upward as I sat back in my chair, wine warm in my hand. For the first time in weeks, I felt prepared to walk into Sunday dinner not as someone waiting for their approval, but as someone ready to set the terms. And as the night stretched on, I knew the next gathering around that chandeliered table would not follow the script they had written for years. Something had shifted, and this time the ending would not belong to them. Sunday arrived again with its familiar rituals. The late afternoon sun stretched across the Whitman driveway as I parked my older SUV, the seat molding to me with a comfort my newer car never had. For a moment I sat still, listening to the engine settle, letting the weight of what I had done anchor me. I had signed the sedan into company ownership. It no longer belonged to me, not in the way my family had once assumed. The thought steadied me as I stepped inside. The smell of pot roast met me at the door, warm and thick, carrying years of history in its aroma. Brooke stood in the entryway, her eyes narrowing almost immediately. "Where's the blue car?" she asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Behind her, my parents exchanged quick glances, small gestures that told me they had already discussed this moment. Mom adjusted her pearl necklace. Dad's jaw tensed, and I hung my jacket in the closet before answering. "I drove my old car today." We took our places at the table. The chandelier above threw its light as it always had, but tonight the air felt charged, as though the walls themselves held their breath. Mom began serving her motions mechanical, her smile tight. For a few minutes only, the scrape of silverware filled the space. Then Dad cleared his throat, his voice slipping into the formal cadence he often used in boardrooms. "We've been thinking about your situation, Claire," he began. Mom folded her napkin carefully across her lap. "Brooke needs reliable transportation while she's job hunting. The market is difficult and every impression matters." Brooke leaned forward, eyes wide with practiced earnestness. "I'll be more careful this time, I swear. That scratch wasn't my fault." She held my gaze, but I only speared a carrot with deliberate calm. I recognized the familiar choreography, Mom's soft concern, Dad's authoritative conclusion, Brooke's plea. The performance had been polished over years. I chewed slowly, savoring the roast, letting their words hang unanswered. For once, I didn't rush to fill the silence. By dessert, the tension had thickened. Apple pie sat on plates untouched while Dad shifted in his chair, and Mom refilled water that didn't need it. Brooke's foot tapped an impatient rhythm beneath the table. Finally, I set down my spoon and smiled. "That won't be possible." Mom froze mid-motion, pitcher suspended. "What do you mean?" I dabbed my napkin at my mouth, my voice steady. "I don't own that car anymore." The silence that followed was heavy. Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "You sold it already." Another impulsive decision. Dad's face tightened, triumph flickering in his eyes, as though I had confirmed his doubts. I shook my head. "I transferred it to my company. It's now a corporate asset used for business only." The words landed with the weight of finality. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table. The official seals and signatures stared back under the chandelier's light. "The car belongs to Summit Neurotech now. Insurance maintenance. Everything is handled by the company. I use it exclusively for client meetings." Brooke snatched up the papers, her hands trembling as she scanned them. "This isn't fair," she whispered. I met her eyes. It's done. Mom looked between us, searching for an opening. Can they just take your car like that? I slid the papers back toward me. They didn't take it. I offered the arrangement. It benefits the company and it protects what I worked for. Dad's voice rose, his face reddening. You've always been difficult, but this is beyond, I interrupted quietly, beyond protecting something I earned. His mouth opened, then closed, the words faltering. Brooke shoved back her chair, the legs scraping against wood. You've always been selfish, she said, her voice shaking. Always keeping score. I kept my tone calm. Would you like me to? The room stilled. 3 semesters of textbooks I paid for after you switched majors. The rent I covered when you were between jobs. The deposit for your last apartment that never came back. The ticking of the grandfather clock filled the pause that followed. Brooke's shoulders slumped, her conviction faltering. You had chances I didn't, she muttered. I turned to my parents. You gave her every chance. Every time she quit, you called it compassion. Every time I worked, you called it duty. The pattern is clear. Mom's lips pressed thin. Not everyone is built like you, Claire. I nodded once. But everyone deserves the chance to build themselves. You never gave her that. Dad slammed his hand on the table, reclaiming control. This isn't about Brooke. It's about family. It's about loyalty. I straightened my voice even. No, it's about a pattern. I work, she takes. My achievements become shared property, but my struggles stay mine alone. I tapped the folder softly. Not anymore. For a moment the room seemed to shift. My parents' faces held disbelief. Brooke's held panic, but I felt only calm. Even if I wanted to, I said quietly, I legally cannot let her drive that car. It's not mine to lend. Dad's face darkened further. If this is how you treat family, maybe you should reconsider your place in this family's future. His words hung like a blade. I tilted my head, curious. Are you threatening to cut me out of the will? The silence that followed was answer enough. Mom leaned in, her voice soft with practiced sorrow. You're too attached to material things. Maybe you should talk to someone about that. Brooke's eyes filled with tears, whether genuine or not, I couldn't tell. You've betrayed us, she whispered. I folded the folder, slid it back into my bag, and stood. I've already received my inheritance, I said gently. You taught me to work, to persist, to stand alone. That is worth more than anything you could leave behind. The words seemed to land like stones, unexpected in their weight. For the first time, Dad looked uncertain. His authority faltered. I gathered my purse and keys from the sideboard, my movements deliberate. I love you, I said, meaning it. But love has boundaries. Love respects. I walked to the door without haste. Behind me, chairs shifted, but no one followed. Outside, my SUV waited with its familiar rumble, steady and sure. As I pulled away, the house shrank in the rearview mirror, 3 figures frozen in the window, their script broken. The road ahead stretched open, carrying me toward a life I had chosen on my own terms. And though I didn't yet know what would come next, I knew the balance had shifted, and nothing in that house would ever be the same. The week after that dinner felt different. My apartment was quiet in the evenings, but it wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was clear, steady, almost light. Each morning I passed the company's reserved parking space and saw the sedan waiting with its fresh plates and discreet logo. It was strange how much calmer I felt, knowing it no longer belonged to me alone. The car had been mine, then theirs in practice, and now it stood protected, out of reach. At work, the change was noticed too. Howard stopped me in the hallway one afternoon, tapping a copy of the budget proposal I'd written. That vehicle move was sharp, he said with a rare smile. You saved us money and strengthened our image. I thanked him and walked away with a steady heartbeat, realizing that a decision born of necessity had become a mark of respect in the office. My boss, David, mentioned later that week how smoothly clients had responded to the new branding. It shows stability, he said, glancing out the window toward the lot where the sedan sat. Exactly what we want. By Friday, the paperwork was complete, the insurance settled, and the car detailed until not even a trace of the old scratch remained. Walter from legal handed me the final copies, his tone approving. "Everything is official," he said. "No one can challenge it now." The words felt like a seal pressed into wax final and unchangeable. That Sunday, I pulled into my parents' driveway in my SUV once again. The kitchen smelled the same, the roast just as tender, but I carried myself differently as I took my seat at the table. Brooke's eyes darted toward the window, searching for a glimpse of the sedan, but she found only the older car parked outside. Dad cleared his throat, the sound deliberate. "We've been discussing things," he began, his voice measured. Mom folded her napkin neatly as though the gesture could anchor her composure. "It doesn't make sense for the car to just sit there during the week," she said softly. Brooke leaned forward, her voice trembling with practiced sincerity. "I'll take better care of it this time, I promise." I let their words settle before I answered. My plate was half empty, the pie waiting untouched when I finally spoke. "That won't be possible," I said calmly. Their faces shifted almost in unison, confusion, then disbelief. "I don't own that car anymore." Dad's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" I placed the corporate folder on the table once more, the same one I had carried before. "It belongs to Summit Neurotech now. It's a company asset." Brooke's hand trembled as she reached for the papers again, scanning the signatures with growing urgency. "This can't be real," she whispered. I met her gaze. "It is." Mom's voice cracked, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "How could you? After all we've sacrificed." My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice steady. $600 per semester. That was the contribution. I paid for the rest. The room fell silent. Dad's face darkened, his authority faltering. He leaned forward, his voice rough. "You've made your point, but this family is bigger than paperwork." I stood slowly, gathering the folder. "Love is bigger than paperwork," I said, "but love also respects." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected, but true all the same. Brooke's chair scraped back, her tears spilling now. "You've betrayed us," she said, her voice shaking. "You've always held everything over me." I turned toward her, calm. "I kept records because I hoped something would change. I hoped one day it would balance." She shook her head, unable to answer. Dad exhaled sharply. "If you keep this up, Claire, you may not have a place in this family's future." The threat lingered in the room, but I felt no fear. Instead, I nodded once. "Then I will build my own future." With that, I took my purse and keys, moving toward the door with deliberate steps. The air outside was crisp as I slid into the driver's seat of my SUV. The engine turned over with its familiar rumble grounding me. In the rearview mirror, I saw them watching from the window, 3 silhouettes frozen against the chandelier's glow, unsure of what to say now that the old script no longer worked. I drove away with a steady calm, knowing the balance had shifted for good. And though the next chapter hadn't yet revealed itself, I could feel it forming, waiting just beyond the horizon. Because this time, the terms would not be theirs to set. The Sunday after I revealed the car was no longer mine. The air at my parents' table felt unfamiliar. They tried to settle into the old routine, but the balance had shifted, and each of us knew it. Brooke toyed with her fork, silent for once. Mom's smile was fragile, forced. Dad cleared his throat several times, as though words would restore his authority, but none came. The chandelier above us gleamed, and I ate my meal with calm steadiness, no longer waiting for permission to breathe. When the silence stretched too long, Dad finally spoke. "If this is how you treat family," he said, his voice firm but less certain than before, "you'll regret it." I folded my napkin neatly. "Family doesn't mean taking without asking," I answered quietly. The words settled across the table, heavier than any threat. Brooke's eyes dropped, her shoulders, curling in her usual confidence gone. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking in that room. The following week, work carried on with its steady rhythm. My new title had started circulating in internal emails, and colleagues stopped by my office to offer congratulations. Tyler adjusted my schedule to handle additional client meetings, his efficiency grounding me when the days grew long. In the parking lot, the sedan gleamed with the company logo, no longer a point of contention, but a professional tool. Each time I unlocked it with the new corporate key, I felt the distance grow between my choices and the patterns I had left behind. At home, voicemails arrived from Mom, her voice softer than usual. "Just checking in," she said once. Another time, "Dinner will be ready if you want to come." The guilt I had always braced for never came through in her words. They were shorter, careful, as if she were learning how to speak to me without demands. I let the messages play, then deleted them, unsure, yet if I wanted to answer. Jenna noticed the difference when we met for coffee. She stirred her latte, watching me. "You look lighter," she said. I smiled faintly. "The silence feels different now. Not empty, just mine." She raised her cup. "That's a victory worth holding on to." Across the cafe window, the afternoon sun caught in her hair, and for a moment I felt the quiet affirmation of being seen by someone who understood. News about Brooke reached me through Jenna a week later. "She's stuck with a job past 90 days, she said carefully, watching my face. The words landed without the sting I once carried. "Good for her," I said, surprised at the evenness of my own tone. For years, her instability had been another weight on my shoulders. Now it was hers to manage, and mine to acknowledge without carrying. The following Sunday, I did sit again at my parents' table. Mom placed a plate in front of me without speaking. Dad watched me carefully, his jaw tight, but he said nothing. Brooke sat quietly, her hands folded, her eyes fixed on her food. The usual arguments didn't come. The familiar requests didn't arrive. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was uncertain, as if they were waiting to see what rules existed now that I had drawn my own. I ate slowly, aware of their eyes, but unbothered. Each bite felt like a small declaration I could be here without surrendering myself. When the meal ended, I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood. "Thank you for dinner," I said. My words were polite, simple, but final. Mom nodded, her lips pressed tight. Dad gave a curt nod. Brooke whispered, "Thanks for coming," almost too softly to hear. I left the table calm, the air behind me filled with the sound of a house relearning its silence. Driving home in my SUV, the evening sun painted the road gold. I didn't look in the mirror this time. Their figures at the window no longer held me the way they once had. The path ahead was open-shaped by decisions I had finally claimed as my own, and though part of me wondered what the future of those dinners might hold, I knew the terms had changed for good. The next step would not be about surviving their patterns, but about building something entirely new. The weeks that followed moved more quietly than I expected. Work filled most of my days, but it wasn't the endless climb it once felt like. Meetings with clients, late nights reviewing proposals, even the pressure of my new title carried a steadiness now. Each time I walked through the parking garage and saw the sedan waiting with the company logo gleaming across its side, I felt the same calm resolve. What had once been a symbol of taking was now secured by my own decision, repurposed into something I could be proud of without fear of losing it. At home, my phone buzzed less with demands and more with cautious messages. Mom sent a simple text before Christmas, thinking of you. Dad signed his name to the family card instead of letting her write it for him. Small gestures, but different than before. Brooke kept her distance, though word reached me through Jenna that she had finally held on to a job past her probation period. I didn't chase for updates, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel responsible for whether she succeeded or failed. That weight was hers to carry, not mine. One evening after work, I sat with Jenna at our usual cafe, steam curling from our cups. She asked how I felt now that months had passed since that dinner table confrontation. I thought for a long moment before answering. "It's not about winning," I said softly. "It's about being able to sit in my own life without feeling like someone else is writing the rules." She nodded, squeezing my hand across the table. The simplicity of the moment, the comfort of being understood, felt like more than any trophy or contract could give me. In the Spring Summit, Neurotech featured the sedan in a campaign about innovation and client trust. A photo of me beside the car, smiling with a group of colleagues after closing a major deal, hung in the main office. The scratch, the lies, the arguments, it was all gone erased under fresh paint and repurposed purpose. I walked past the framed photo one morning, running my hand along the silver edge, and thought about how distance could sometimes heal better than confrontation ever could. At home, I filled my shelves with new dishes and glasses, nothing handed down, nothing tied to old stories. For the first time, my table was truly mine. Colleagues came over for dinner one Friday, laughter rising easily around the food I had cooked myself. When someone asked about my family, I answered honestly, "We're learning how to connect in new ways slowly, but on terms that work for me now." Saying it aloud didn't sting. It felt like truth spoken without shame. One afternoon, a younger colleague named Sarah came to my office, her voice unsteady as she explained that her work on a project was being overshadowed by someone else's credit. I listened carefully, then told her what no one had told me at her age. "Your achievements belong to you," I said gently. "Don't apologize for claiming them." Her shoulders eased, and I realized in that moment that the lessons I had carved out of hardship were already shaping something better for someone else. Looking back now, the car was never really the point. It was about drawing a line and saying, "This is mine. This is earned. This will be respected." For years I had confused love with sacrifice, loyalty with silence. But love without respect isn't love at all. Respect, I learned, begins at the boundary you refuse to let others cross. I still visit my parents sometimes. The conversations are shorter, less certain, but kinder in their own way. We no longer pretend the past didn't happen, and we no longer pretend we can go back. That's enough for me. Brooke is trying in her own halting steps, and while I don't carry her future anymore, I can hope she finds her footing without leaning on mine. What matters most is that I finally stand in my own space without apology. If there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that success isn't measured by what you own, but by the boundaries that protect what you've earned. Dignity once claimed changes everything. And once you stop giving away the pieces that make you whole, no one can take them from you again. Thank you for listening to my story. If it reminded you of a moment where you had to stand your ground, I'd love to hear it. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.